All right, wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. There are so many of you here and we are so excited about this. My name is Laurel Hitchcock and I am a board member of Alabama Possible. I'm also a professor of social work at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I have been working with Alabama Possible for almost 6 years now, and also working with poverty simulations. And this meeting is a combination meeting. We have a poverty simulation consortium for everybody in the state of Alabama who does poverty simulations. And we've opened this up today to just anybody who's interested because this is a really amazing topic. So I want to just welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. We will provide you with information about how you can access the recording later if you're interested. If you have questions, there'll be time for question and answers at the end, but you're welcome to put your questions in the chat feature as well. And Manisha and I will be monitoring those. So I'm just thrilled today to introduce my good friend and colleague, Dr. Dawn Taylor Peterson. I've known Dawn for almost 8 years now. We've been working together, Dawn, around simulations at UAB and particularly around the poverty simulations. Dawn is an associate, I'm going to read a little bit from her bio here. She's an associate professor in the School of Medicine in the Department of Medical Education at UAB. She also has a secondary appointment in the School of Health Professions in the Department of Health Science Administration. She holds a PhD in instructional design and as well an educational specialist degree and a Master's of Arts in Education. She's one smart lady and I really enjoy working with her. At UAB, she serves as the Director for Faculty Development and Training for the Office of Interprofessional Simulation for Innovative and Clinical Practice. And today she's going to talk to us about the virtual poverty simulations that we've been doing at UAB. So Dawn, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Laurel, for that kind introduction. It's hard to believe it's been 8 years. Time goes by so quickly.
It does.
So I'm going to take a minute to share my screen and hopefully if everyone can just give me kind of a head nod or thumbs up that you can see my screen, fantastic. So I am going to be talking to you today kind of about the story at UAB and how we transitioned from an in-person poverty simulation experience to a virtual experience due to COVID. And so there are a couple of things that I want to do in our time together. So I first of all want to tell you just briefly about how we did our in-person poverty simulation. We made a couple of slight tweaks to the in-person one that we really wanted to carry over to the virtual one. And so I'm going to share that with you for context. So after I share just a couple details about our in-person simulation, I'm going to tell you how we went about planning for our virtual simulation. And then I'm going to share the structure of the virtual simulation we've been running for nearly a year at this point. I'm going to finish by sharing some feedback and lessons learned at the end, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions. And Laurel and Manisha, if you see a question that comes up in the chat and you think it's great to just pause me, I'm happy for you to pause me and have me answer that question in real time if it's easier than going to the end. So I'm thinking that many of you on this call are familiar with the in-person poverty simulation, and you'll see up here on the screen a map of the in-person poverty simulation with all the chairs and all the seating. And in the very center, we typically have the setup for all of the families that are part of the simulation. And then around the edge of the room, you have all of the service providers. And that's how we offered our poverty simulation for probably the past, I would say, 6 years or so before COVID, 6 or 7 years before COVID. We did it in our rec center. And one thing we did a little differently, I think from many people that offer the poverty simulation, we only offer our poverty simulation to an interprofessional group of students or learners, meaning all of our sessions that we offer of the poverty simulation have multiple professions in them for multiple programs. So at UAB, the poverty simulation is required for 12 to 13 different programs. And when I say programs, I mean students from medicine, nursing, optometry, dentistry, criminal justice, social work, the physician assistant program, the physical therapy program, a couple of our residency programs in anesthesia and pediatrics. Our chaplaincy residency within the health system requires their chaplain residents to go through. So we are required by many of the programs. And because of this, we think it makes for a very rich experience to mix these people in the poverty simulation. So we don't offer, for instance, we would not offer one with all med students or one for all nursing students. We would offer two and have a mix of students in each one. And so you can see in this photo, there are all these color-coded sheets. And so as the learners or students would arrive, they would be color-coded, and we would have this form where there would be color-coded debriefing groups, so we could make sure that each group or each family had a mix of professions in it. So the students got to know each other, which really served for a rich discussion after the simulation. So this next shot is, our screenshot is a slide of how we arranged interprofessional debriefing groups. So a lot of the paperwork in the poverty simulation kit that comes talks about debriefing, and it says you could do small groups, or it also says you can do one whole group. And we find it's very difficult to get good conversation going if you have 80 learners talking at one time or part of a discussion at one time. So we typically run 8 different small groups, and you can see the different colors on the screen. And so each color represents a group that will meet together before the simulation and then after the simulation for a debriefing. And so we kind of blocked the groups off to show that there are different families represented in each group. The other thing that we do is that we require a pre-brief or an orientation to the simulation once all the students arrive. And so this is a photo of one of our facilitators. And so I'm going to go back a screen just to show you. So if you'll look at this red box up here, imagine that the lady you see on the next screen is standing right here in the middle, and she has called all of the students who are part of these families together. She's giving a pre-brief or an orientation, and she's using a script so that every group in the room or in the gym or rec center gets the same orientation or pre-briefing. And then we run the simulation just as it is designed in the kit, the 4 15-minute weeks. And then at the end, we do a small group debriefing. And so you see here, all the students within that those color groups pull their chairs up, sit together, and they're debriefed by one of our trained facilitators. And so we use faculty and staff from across the campus to debrief. We typically, before COVID, ran about 16 poverty simulation sessions a year. And so we had 8 small groups for each of those 16 simulations. So we have around 45 to 50 debriefers across campus that sign up for each session to lead a small group debriefing. We have a very specific debriefing structure that every debriefer follows. And so we get the students' reactions. We have them give a brief sentence or two about their family's experience over the month. We have the facilitators preview that we're going to talk about 3 very specific things in the poverty simulation debriefing. We talk about challenges that the students faced. We talked about their attitudes and whether or not their attitudes towards poverty changed over the course of the simulation. And then we also asked them at the end to really give thought as to any interprofessional insights they have and how they might change their practice when they get into practice, or if they're currently practicing, how they might change their practice after this event. And then we have a summary or wrap up. So those are the things that I would say that we do maybe a little bit differently from others that offer the poverty simulation. And so when it came time for planning for our virtual experience, we decided to get a focus group together. And so this focus group really wanted to focus on something that was free of charge, that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel and create something new. So we landed on the spent.org simulation because it is free. It's an online platform. And we also wanted to stick to or adhere to those best practices in simulation. And at UAB, we're really fortunate to have an internationally accredited simulation program. The Society for Simulation Healthcare is our international accrediting body. And so we are accredited in core and teaching and education at UAB. And so we feel really strongly about keeping those best practices of simulation, even in the virtual format. And those best practices that we wanted to keep were the pre-briefing, the simulation itself, and then that small group interprofessional debriefing. We really needed to keep our simulation in the same time frame because we didn't really have the luxury of extending it and making it longer. We wanted to keep it either the same length of time, which for us was 2.5 hours, or shorter. We needed to make sure that it was easily accessible for our learners and that they had a very easy time accessing the content and the simulation, and that it was easy for them to get into the debriefing. And we needed to make sure that what we set up required a minimum time commitment for our faculty that sent learners. So these were our goals in coming up with a structure for the virtual experience. So this is what we came up with. We decided that the best thing for us to do was to create a module within Canvas. And Canvas is our LMS, or our learning management system at UAB, that every student and faculty member has access to. And they just go on and they enter their ID and password, and they're able to access any module that's been assigned to them. And so what I'm going to do now is click out and show you a link and actually kind of take you on a tour through what this module looks like. And so if you'll bear with me for just a second, it should take me straight to, so Laurel, can you see my screen changing? You can't? Okay, what I can do is exit and reshare.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm gonna stop sharing, and now I'm gonna reshare my screen because my module is pulled up. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Dawn.
Awesome. So this is the home page of the poverty simulation module that we created. And again, we needed something that could be accessed by any student. So basically our office, we created the module. We contacted faculty who typically send learners to the simulation, and those would be the 12 or 13 groups of learners I mentioned earlier. They assign their learners to the poverty simulation module within our LMS. And there are several ways to do that. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty because that really has to do with the way your LMS functions, but basically the learners have to be assigned to the module. So when they get here, we wanted something super simple and straightforward. And so you click here to begin the module, and there are all of these just super basic sections. So there's an overview of their learning experience, which kind of gives them a brief kind of structure of what to anticipate in the 2-hour time frame. They have a schedule page, some content on poverty in the United States and Alabama. There is the actual page for the interactive simulation, a page for debriefing, and then a page for the electronic evaluation. And so now I'm going to take a minute to kind of scroll through this so you can see. So right here, this is the overview. They can access this content in one of several ways. They can click on it and they can watch a video. I'm not going to play the video. It's a 3 or 4 minute video. It's actually me talking, giving them an overview of their learning experience. They can also click right here on this link and download a transcript so they can read it or they can hear it through the video. And this basically tells them what to expect for the next 2 hours. They click next, and then you'll see schedule for today. So if you'll notice, this module is chunked into kind of 4 main areas. You'll see learning about poverty has a 30-minute designation, an interactive simulation experience for 30 minutes. That's the spent.org simulation, and I'll show that to you in just a moment. There's 45 minutes allotted for small group debriefing, and then there's an electronic evaluation that takes about 5 minutes. And because we offer this so many different times in the semester, you can see here on this page that there are different dates listed. And so when they log into the module, they find the date where they're attending, and it gives them their specific schedule for that date. So now this is the page where they're actually reading about content about poverty in the United States and children in poverty. There are links to different brochures, and there are links to different websites and different publications on this page. So we anticipate that it would take them about 30 minutes to get through this content. Then they would click next. So here's where they're getting the information to prepare them for the interactive simulation. Notice in red right here, it says that they have to use a desktop or laptop for this experience, that we don't want them to use an iPad or a phone because we know that spent.org doesn't have full functionality unless you're on a laptop or desktop computer. This right here is an audio file. They can click this audio file, or they can click here for a PDF version of the text that is right below. And this basically is telling them all about the SPENT simulation and how to interact with it and what to expect. So we believe that if we give them a lot of information about what to expect, that's going to help them interact more effectively, because we don't want them spending their simulation time trying to figure out the website and what to do and where to click. We want to give them that information up front so they feel comfortable knowing what they're supposed to do once they get to that website. And then at the bottom here, it tells them how to start the simulation, and it gives them a link. So I'm going to click, and I'm going to hope that it works. We'll see. Did it change, Laurel? Okay, good. So here is the homepage for spent.org. So they click this button, continue to spent. This is free for anyone. They have to click accept the challenge. It gives them some information. And their goal is to make it through the month on $1,000. So then you click find a job. And then here's kind of what I would call the main interface. So there are lots of different things on this interface. The days of the month are over here on the right. So anytime they do an action, it will give a prompt on the screen, and it takes them through the days of the month. On the top left, you see the balance of how much money they have remaining. And then there is a sound button. There are ways to get cash down here on the bottom left. And then any activity, or I guess prompt, or the simulation part is here in the very center of the screen. So the first thing they're asked to do is to find a job. They can scroll through. There's usually 3 different jobs they might choose. So you click on a job, gives them a little bit of information, tells them their weekly pay. Click continue. So now it talks about health insurance. And so the students have to go through deciding which health insurance plan they want. I'm just going to click one. So then it gives them information, solid coverage and a medium copay, but it's going to cost $65 a paycheck. Then they have to figure out a place to live. And so if you use the slider bar, you can get further away from work and pay less money, or you can get closer to work and pay more money. And they get to actually choose where along this continuum they want to live. It gives them a result and some facts. Now, I will say it is important to note that the facts that are stated in some of these prompts that come up are from 2012, because this simulation was created out of Raleigh-Durham in 2012. And so we have had some people on the UAB campus say, man, we wish that we had current facts from 2021. And I hear you and I agree with you. And this is the free simulation that we have right now. And I do think some of our faculty have chosen to have their students kind of take some notes and go looking for some of those facts to see how much they've changed. And that might be one way you handle the challenge of having some of the facts and data out of here being from 2012. So basically they just click continue, and they are presented with what I would call multiple challenges as they continue to click through. You'll notice on the right, I'm on day 4 And on the top left, I only have $166 left because I paid rent. And you see here, it says your new apartment is too small for your stuff. What do you want to do? Do you want to rent a unit, have a yard sale, or ask a friend to store it? Now, there are ways to incorporate social media in this platform. You could click ask a friend to store it, and you could use Facebook or Twitter. We do not necessarily take advantage of that option at UAB just because it could potentially cause our students to be off on social media all day. So they typically would just choose one of the other two options, and they just would go through and just keep clicking to see how long they could make it in the month. So I'm going to go back to our module. So here we are in the module. There is a chance, and it tells you this in all this verbiage up here, that the student will run out of money in the first 5, 6, 7 days. And so we ask them, if you run out of money, we want you to go back and do it again and make different choices and make note of what choices did you make and how far along in the month did you get and what allowed you to get farther along in the month and what caused you to run out of money very quickly. And that serves as a lot of the discussion for our debriefings. So once they finish this, they go to the debriefing page. So here are some bullets that help them prepare for the debriefing. We tell them about the purpose, that debriefings will be facilitated by trained faculty and staff. We tell them it'll be an interprofessional group. We ask them to make sure their camera is on and their video is clear and their microphone is good. We require all students to participate in the debriefing as I am now, meaning their camera is on, their screen is on, their microphone is good and clear, because this is a required component of their coursework at UAB. And so the students have to participate in the discussion. This is something we talk to our faculty about in the training. They can't just turn their screen off and sit on mute the whole time. They actually have to be part of the discussion. We also made the decision to not use the chat function during debriefing because our small groups usually contain a maximum of 10 students plus one facilitator. And we want there to be a lot of good discussion. And our fear was that if we allowed them to chat, all they would do would be to type for 45 minutes. And so to encourage discussion, we asked them to not use the chat feature and to actually talk openly among the group about the topics that are brought up by the facilitator. So here is the place where they click their debriefing assignment sheet to get into the debriefing, because remember, we have about 80 people who are logging into this module at one time. And so you click on this debriefing assignment sheet and you should see a colorful grid in Google Docs. Can you see that? Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. So this was our largest virtual simulation that we held on April the 1st this past year. And we had a lot of people in this simulation. You can see we had 9 different debriefing groups. And the challenging part about this is that we actually have to list them by name, because if we didn't put their name, they wouldn't know which group to join. And we want to make sure that our facilitators have an even number of people and that the people are from different professions. So on the back end, I do all of the organizing and coordinating, and I make sure that each group has a mix of professions and that each facilitator usually only has maybe 9 or 10 people. This one was a very large session, so some people did have 11 or 12, but usually we try to keep it to a max of 10 students. And so here's their information. They find their name and they just clicked on the Zoom group at the designated time. If you remember back in the module, it gave a designated time for debriefing. That's the time at which they had to come into the sheet and click out and make that Zoom debriefing group at that time. And then when they finished the debriefing, they went back to the module and they clicked this link right here to complete an evaluation for the course. And their course evaluation was in a survey, I believe it's Qualtrics, but it could be SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, you name it, whatever free online survey system you choose to use. And then they had to fill out the survey and then they were finished. So that is kind of what took up their 2-hour time period. So that is a tour of the, okay, I'm going to stop sharing and get back to my PowerPoint, sorry. That is a tour of the module. And get back, sorry. Here we go. Are we back? Fantastic. Okay, so again, the structure of the module that we just saw, there was an overview, their schedule, content and resources that they had to review before they did the spent.org simulation. Then they had their interactive simulation. They had directions on how to enter the debriefing, and they wrapped up with an evaluation. So we learned a lot over the past year. We started offering this in August of 2020. I'll be honest, it took all summer to get this up and running because it was a brand new module, and we had many logistics to work out with our e-learning system at UAB to try to figure out how do we do one module and have 13 different programs and multiple courses send students to this module each semester. We had 961 learners that have gone through since August of 2020. And we have offered, let's see, 4, 6, 10, 17 sessions in the last year. And so it has been a really good experience. The debriefing feedback, I will say, has been very interesting to me and kind of not what I expected. I will be honest and say I expected debriefers to come back and say, well, they weren't very engaged. They just kind of sat there and stared at me. And interestingly, most debriefers say they had a very good discussion and the learners were super engaged and had a lot of very meaningful take-home points from this session. And I think what we're learning is that with the in-person poverty simulation, those of you who have used it before, you may remember there are a lot of what I'm going to call parts and pieces. There are transportation passes. There are little cards that represent televisions. There are paper paychecks. There are dolls to represent children. And there's just a lot of stuff to it. And our learners used to give us a little pushback in debriefing and say this just wasn't very realistic because I don't use a transportation pass when I drive somewhere. And I don't have a paper check that I take to the bank. And so they were really kind of pushing back on some of what I would call the artifacts of the simulation. And with this online version, because it's just a scenario that someone presents to them, they can actually imagine themselves in that situation. What is it like to be in an apartment that's too full of stuff? You know, what do I have to get rid of some of my stuff. What am I going to do? Some of the other prompts talk about you've worked a long week and it's Friday night and you have an opportunity to meet a friend for dinner. You would love to do that, but you know, it's going to cost you, $40 to get a babysitter. What are you going to do? And so it's presenting them with situations where they can actually imagine themselves in that scenario and they're not frustrated by the transportation passes or the baby dolls or some of the other things that are in the in-person experience. And so our debriefing feedback is that it is they have almost more engaging discussions in this virtual environment, which I'm so thrilled to hear. And I'm also surprised and excited to hear that. We've also learned that our communication with faculty for us is really important because, again, we're seeing many learners over the course of a year. I'm communicating with probably 13 to 15 faculty to do this. And some faculty are relying on our team to be the communicator with their students. And what we're having to do is really kind of set boundaries and say, we created the module and you have access to the module. You have to tell us what students are coming on what day so we can populate the debriefing grid. But other than that, the communication is on you. I can't manage all 15 courses that include the poverty simulation module. And so we've had to really kind of set some boundaries with faculty as far as wanting us to go in and check the module and make changes to it within their courses. I will also say the administrative time. The one downside to this, I think, model or setup is that it takes an inordinate amount of time to schedule and organize and coordinate. I am very fortunate that I have been given designated time to do this. And I would say in a semester where we're running 6 or 7 of these, it probably takes up 25% of my time because there is constant communication with faculty. They send me a list of learners, they send me dates, and then inevitably it changes. And every time it changes, that debriefing grid changes. And then you have a debriefer that gets pulled into a meeting and they can't come. So that means I'm getting another debriefer. And so there's just a lot of time it requires to do this. And we also believe it's worth it because we're able to serve so many learners across our campus in an easily accessible way that they can, access it from their home or from the computer lab or, from wherever they are. So I think it's been a really good experience for us. So I'm going to stop talking right now because I have talked a lot, and I'm really curious if anyone has any questions right now about this adventure.
Dawn, we don't see any questions in the chat, unless Manisha, you see some that I missed, but please, no.
No.
No, you can also unmute and ask your questions, because I know that not all of you are from universities and you're thinking about incorporating this in different ways. And so you may not have access to a learning management system. You might have what's called a content management system, or you might have other ways that you're thinking about doing this. And I am very confident that we can offer you some assistance with that.
So
Yes.
there is one question, Laurel, now. Is this only used for on-campus students?
Is this question specific to UAB?
It's not. Amanda Outlaw, do you want to unmute and give us some context for your question? Yeah, there you are. Hi, Amanda.
Hi. I'm Amanda Outlaw, and I live in Daphne, Alabama. I'm a retired Alabama Cooperative Extension educator.
Yes.
And we've done something similar to this, but not as, what you call it, LMS or content.
Learning management system.
Yeah.
Oh, welcome to the real world. We did it with high school students.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting. And I work with also my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority in Mobile. We have over 400 members. And it sounds so interesting because we have a lot of first-time people who are living on their own.
Yeah.
Themselves in different situations. And this was really interesting. And so I was just wondering, I have to check with our technology people. We may have something that we can use for this, but it's just really interesting because we don't prepare students for the real world.
Right.
And, since 2019, they've been forced to make changes and live a different life. And so this is great. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think to answer the question, is it available for people outside of UAB? I think right now it's not, or ours isn't. I mean, anyone can use the spent.org simulation that I showed you. It's free. You just have to type the web address in. As far as our platform, right now we can only take people who are UAB students because it is behind a Blazer ID and password, meaning it has to be an enrolled student in order for them to log in and use this module.
Dawn, can I ask a question?
Yes. Hey, Eddie.
So on the same line, I teach service-oriented courses around poverty, working poor, whatever.
Yeah.
The service-oriented portion is working with Save First to prepare tax returns for low-income families who qualify for the EITC, which we had to do virtually this time, which was a new experience that was very, very different. But I used the Spent website to make my students go through the poverty sim, and use another website too. I can't remember the name of it, but it gave them credits instead of give them money, and you could spend 1 credit for this or 2 credits for that. But they love the Spent website.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a way to have a debriefing afterwards because they were all doing it on their own at various times.
Right.
So I had discussion prompts, talk about this, do it several times. Tell us how you felt about this. Did you see certain patterns? Were you always looking after your kids? Or were you looking out for yourself, or what? A variety of questions. We had some very good discussion. But one of those classes is an online class for our totally online accounting students. I don't know how, is there any way to do what you're doing here with an online group?
Well, I mean, we do have, I can say that some of our public health students that come are in an online public health course. and their faculty just gives them options throughout the semester and says you can sign up for any of these choices. And when you sign up, you do have to attend a debriefing. And so that is given to them way ahead of time, so they know that at least one time during the semester, they're going to have to be live on camera. And so the way we work with faculty is that the faculty takes the responsibility of notifying the student and setting up those requirements within that faculty's course. So we
Okay,
have
so-
had online, like
So you
all
can just
online
give-
students participate.
So you just give them a variety of dates to choose from. Okay,
Mhm.
that works. For folks who are not in the 13 programs that it's required, is there a cost to us?
That is above, kind of above my level. I'm happy to connect with you via email and connect our finance person to your finance person at UAB.
Okay, thank you.
I will add, Eddie, that I teach only online courses in my social work program. And so all of my students do this online. So it works really well for online programs, and it works really well if you are thinking about, if you're working with organizations and you're trying to link people geographically. An online virtual poverty simulation with a virtual discussion would be a great way to do that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what next year looks like with tax prep. This year, we had obviously on campus and online folks as well. Everybody worked through Save First virtually with the Get Your Refund, software, tax software. I don't know what next year looks like. So there are other organizations like Save First, obviously around the country that people could work with.
I will say, Dawn, there've been some questions about if you don't have access to Canvas. And I threw a couple of options up in the in the chat for folks.
Sure.
There is Moodle, which is
Yep.
an open source learning management system. I also think you probably could do some of this through Google Docs. Do you have other suggestions, Dawn?
I don't. I would say any platform like Google Docs or Moodle where you could have learners log in and see a schedule and content that you have posted, that you would likely be able to do something very similar.
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of organization and good communication to make sure people aren't confused about where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to click and in what order they're supposed to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have other questions? You're welcome to raise your hand or type them in the chat.
I just wanted to say I was really excited to join this today because I wanted to see what masterpiece you all had come up with for doing this virtually. I have used Spent before with students. And as both Laurel and Dawn know, when I was teaching at UAB, it was these like enormous group sizes. And I didn't really have the background to know like this, which is a really great way that you all have been doing it. But what I had previously done was Spent, and it wasn't a bad way, I don't think, but I think this debriefing way is such an improvement. But it was also kind of a fun thing was to have students go through Spent simultaneously. And in this case, it was live because it was pre-COVID, but they kind of voted as a class for which option to pick. And so they got to sort of debate it out in real time, like why they would pick the bigger house or the smaller house or the rent or the, whatever. And so it's not quite the same experience as doing it on your own and then coming back and debriefing. But I could see why there might be advantages depending on the setting, and assuming we're not always going to live in COVID virtual times, depending on your setting and your technology and whatever constraints to different formats or different systems, depending on where in the community a group might be, to kind of doing things with a different plan and then coming together to kind of talk through it. But this was really a neat way of looking at it, so you can kind of come back together after your own individualized Spent opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for bringing that up. And you're making me remember that we had a high school pipeline program. It's called SHPEP, Carmel McNicholas Bevensey runs it at UAB, and these are high school students who are in the pipeline to go into some kind of healthcare program. It's a summer enrichment program. And she had her students go through this. And what they did, Laura, was exactly what you described, is that they did small groups. So she did partners of like 2 students together that would go through the simulation and talk about their decisions and why they were making their decisions. And then their debriefing was able to be very rich. They were younger students. They were obviously had not graduated high school yet. And so she felt like it would be more meaningful for them to sit together and to decide together instead of making these decisions on their own. And I think it was a really fruitful discussion for her. So that's a great suggestion.
I will just add real quickly, Dawn, that after my students do the discussion, the debrief, I also have them do a written reflection.
Yes.
Because, and that could be another option, is that if you're working with students in any capacity, is to do some sort of written reflection, which gives them the opportunity to think about it. And I ask, you know, what did you learn and what did you learn from other people, which is always very interesting. We have a question in the chat, and Mary, I'm going to ask you to unmute and give us some context for your question, which is, do you have suggestions for sources for the content info? And I'm not quite sure what you're asking. So can you unmute and share?
Sure. One of the sections here is that before you do the simulation, you have them read a bunch of content about poverty. And you said you have a lot of links to different articles and so forth. And I just wondered if you have some suggestions as to a place to go that you think would be helpful to find that kind of content. I know there are millions of articles and books, but if you had some suggestion about a shortcut way to begin to gather that if you wanted to launch your own program.
Yes, that's a great question. Thanks, Mary. So one thing I think would be helpful is to think about your target population, your learners, your students, your people who will be participating. And where are they from and what is their area of expertise, and maybe what is their job, or are they all from different jobs? Are they from one area? So for instance, if I included some information on child poverty because I know I've got pediatric residents who are coming through. So I wanted to make sure they had good information on child poverty. There are a lot of the other resources are super general. Some of them are from some government websites that I know have accurate data on numbers and figures in poverty. The Alabama Possible website, I believe, is one of those sources because we know that this organization does collect accurate data on poverty in the state of Alabama. So I think that's another great resource. There are other websites that have stories of people who are living in poverty. And so that might be something that you would want to include. And I think it depends on the nature of your discussion. So I know Chandra and I talked a couple of weeks ago, and we were thinking about what would it be like to have people who maybe were in the law practice participate in the simulation. So the resources that I would put in for them might be different from the resources that I would put in for other people. And also knowing that if I had a bunch of different people, I needed to be more generic or kind of wide reaching in the resources that I included. And so Laurel, I'm curious if you have thoughts on this, or just from your experience, one way to get good resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Manisha and I are putting in the Alabama Possible website and the data sheets there, which are actually excellent.
They are.
And Manisha, if you, while I'm talking, could you put in a link to the educator's guide too, which would give them some questions and some different resources as well. Mary, it's such a good question. And one of the things is, you know, we're constantly learning new things about poverty. So I always like to pull in newspaper articles and things like that. And I know that Alabama Arise, if you're not familiar with them, they have a wonderful, thank you, Manisha. They have a wonderful news aggregator that will aggregate newspaper content for each day around poverty issues in Alabama. And so I'll put a link to that in the chat as well when I get to it. And I like to use as well the Annie E. Casey
Yes.
Foundation Kids Count data. It is a wonderful website, and you can actually have students pull data down or look at it. It's an excellent resource as well. Does that give you a good start, Mary, for some suggestions?
Yes and no. This has been very helpful, but you said that you think it will take them about 30 minutes to do it. So clearly you condense what they're looking at a lot. So if I look at all these resources you just talked about, you're not going to get through those in 30 minutes. So do you, and you mentioned tailoring it to your audience, do you change your content for different groups that you're working with?
I don't. And I think that's why we have a lot of content, and you are correct. They will not get through all that content in 30 minutes. And because our audience is so diverse, so some weeks we might have medicine students, optometry students, anesthesia residents, chaplaincy residents. There's a lot of different comment, and I know they're going to pick and choose what they read because there's so many articles and so many resources. So it is more for them to kind of peruse and choose what applies to them, if that makes sense, Mary.
So you have some kind of generalized overall statistics and then links?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And you know, the other thing you might want to look at, Mary, is a short video for people to watch. I think TED Talks around poverty are really good. And you could do a simple Google search around that. My students really like TED Talks.
Yes.
And so I know that there's something there about that. Particularly whoever your audience is, they may not want to read, they might want to watch something.
Yes, and I will also just remember our audience, this is a very, what I would call academic, like these are university students who are required by their undergraduate or master's or licensing program to attend. And so it has much more of what I would call an academic flavor to it. And so I love Laurel's idea of a video, because those of you who work in the community, you want it to be super real, practical, easy to digest. And so, you may just have a series of videos or, you know, a simple website and some statistics.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
Absolutely. Thanks for getting on and giving us some more context for that question, Mary. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I will say real quickly, if you can save that chat with all of those resources in it, if you go into the chat feature and go down to the bottom left-hand corner and you'll see a couple of dots. Click on that, it'll say save chat, and if you save it, it will download right onto your computer. And so Shannon's put some information in the chat as well. So if you have resources that you're willing to share, please go ahead and put those in the chat for us now. We appreciate that. Are there any other questions? Raise of hands or in the chat? No, I don't hear any or see any other questions. Dawn, do you have any final parting thoughts?
I don't know if I do. I think my one thought is that I have to be honest, I entered this project a year ago with a little bit of dread going, how in the world are we going to pull this off? Like, this is a required activity for all of these students. And it has turned out to be a really meaningful experience. And so I just really love the Spent website, especially with some structure, some pre-learning, a little bit of content, and a live debriefing, whether it's in person or via Zoom. I think it can be so meaningful. So I encourage you to give it a shot and reach out. I mean, Laurel, feel free to share my email. People can reach out and they can ask questions, and I'm happy to brainstorm with you.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Don. I was a little bit, having done these live for so
Yes.
many years and having debriefed and facilitated them, I was a little nervous when I did my first virtual debrief, and I found the conversation incredibly meaningful, and the insights that the students had were unique and different. Thank you, Manisha, for putting Don's email address in there. I hadn't gotten to it because I want to pontificate about how I was really surprised by it, how well you can do. I know a couple of students mentioned that they would run through the simulation a couple times because they ran out of money. And so they would go and they would try. And it was a really interesting conversation then we had about health insurance, because a lot of our students at UAB are health professionals. And so they go for the premium health insurance, and then they realize that they spend all their money, and they walk away going, now I understand why a lot of my patients don't have health insurance. And it was just really, really insightful. So I agree with you there. So we're seeing lots of thanks, and we've got Don's email address is in there. We'll hang out for just a few more minutes, but we're done with our content. So, but we'll happy to answer any questions. And Manisha is going to share the recording of this website or of this webinar with you all so that you can have it in the future. And we just thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, everyone.